this session. I would like to begin with welcome of Professor Andrew Gunstone, who is the inaugural Associate Deputy Vice Chancellor at Federation University, Australia, and has a lot of work in the area of reconciliation. He is renowned in the industry for his contributions, his work in the space of working with the First Nations people and reconciliation plans. And again, the objectives of this session online are just to let the multicultural community understand what is the voice to parliament and how it could affect them, and also demystify some of the myths that are going around. As far as the logistics of this session go, we will be asking some questions to Professor Andrew Gunstone. I will be the moderator, and again, all those who are attending, they have been put on a mute mode just to make the session more efficient and productive. We would like to finish off in 30 minutes. Those who have any questions, feel free to put those questions in the chat window, and we'll try to take those questions at the end. And if we go over 7:30, maybe Andrew will leave, but we will try to answer those questions or get you answers on those questions if at all we do not have the answers. And again, feel free to engage with Professor Andrew Gunstone or myself or other people who are organizing this session today. Try to get the right answer. That's the key thing. Don't go by rumors, don't go by gossips. And the voting is on 14th of October. Pre-polling has already started. Make up your minds using the right piece of information. And again, voting is mandatory, so please do let your friends, family members and relatives know that if they don't vote, then they will be paying an infringement notice of about $120. So it's very, very vital that first of all we understand what the referendum is. Voting is mandatory, and then we gather the information and make an informed choice to make our vote. I hope all of you can hear me clearly, and I will now go on to some of the basic questions that I have for you, Andrew. And again, since all of us who are attending today are first generation migrants in Australia, most of us, we would really like to understand, first of all, what is the referendum and what is the process of referendum?
Sure. So look, thanks very much. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging country and acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, where I live and work, and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Thanks very much for the invitation, Harpreet. I just want to acknowledge all your extraordinary commitment and work for educating people on the voice. I think it's fantastic. So the referendum, we're one of the few countries in the world that actually gets to allow its citizens every few years to change its constitution. Most countries, even democracies, don't get to do this. So one of the things that we're struggling in this referendum, we've got about 30% of the Australian population that have never even heard that we have a constitution, but we do. So we had a constitution in 1901, and one of the sections, section 128 of the constitution, actually says that from time to time there'll be a referendum to change the constitution. It doesn't happen often. We've only had 44 attempts over the years, and of those 44 attempts, only 8 have succeeded. One of the reasons it's hard to succeed is you need what's called a double majority. So you need a majority of Australian citizens. So of all Australian citizens across the country, you need 50.1% of those people voting to vote yes. But you also need a majority of states. So the territories count in the overall population, but not in the states. So there's only 6 states, so Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania, South Australia, and West Australia. Of those 6 states, you need 4, which is the majority, to succeed. So there have been examples in the past where you've had a majority of the overall population, but you've only had 3 of the 6 states, therefore it failed. So most referendums don't succeed. And so this referendum is simply about a request from Indigenous people to be recognised in the Constitution. And that's been an argument being made for many years. And basically nearly everyone agrees on that part. So even the people voting, who are leading the no case, do agree that the Aboriginal people should be recognised. The reason that's the case is Aboriginal people have been in this continent for 65,000 plus years. So 64,500 years before anyone else came here. So Aboriginal people have been here looking after the land, caring for the land for millennia and millennia and millennia. They're the longest continuing culture on the face of this planet. So recognising them in the Constitution would bring Australia into line with every other former British colony on this planet. So the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and many other countries already recognise their Indigenous peoples in the Constitution. That's the easy part, and people understand that, recognising that's important. But the other part is Aboriginal people have for many years had great big discussions and dialogues that culminated in 2017 with a formal request, and what they were asked over many years to consider how they want to be recognised. Do they want to be recognised as a merely symbolic act in a preamble as the beginning statement of the Constitution, or do they want to be recognised in different ways? And overwhelmingly, Indigenous people have argued, over 83% of Indigenous people argue for this, they want to be recognised through a voice. So their idea of being recognised is through a practical means called a voice. And that is simply an advisory body, nothing more, nothing less. It doesn't have any powers to make the government do anything. It just gives advice. And why they feel this is necessary, and I back this up, I've been working in this space for 25 years, and we'd all know this. If we want policies to reflect multicultural Australia, or if we want policies to reflect rural Australia or in the cities, we need to talk to people with lived experiences. There's no point doing policies on West Australia if there's no one in West Australia to talk to. So clearly, to get the best policy outcomes, you need to talk to the people most clearly involved in the process. So that's all it's saying. Aboriginal people should be consulted on matters that impact upon their lives. So if you're looking at education or health, you need to have a consultation with Aboriginal people. That's all it is. The government can consult and then decide not to take that advice. But all the academic analysis, all the policy analysis over many, many decades, both in Australia and overseas, conclusively show, and I've done a lot of this work myself, conclusively show that when you develop policy with Indigenous peoples through consulting with them, you get better policies. So that's all the referendum is.
Very, very pertinent points, Andrew, and a very good background. Now, everyone is worried about change. And, we get worried about change when we are asked to vaccinate. We get worried about change when, things happen in some parts of the world, or we are asked to live a greener or sustainable lifestyle. We get worried. And some of the people are anxious. So can you please tell us what will change if this referendum goes through and what will not change?
It's a really good question, because one of the reasons why there haven't been many referendums successful is people don't like change. But it's important to remember, the people that wrote our Constitution wanted it to change. They were actually very wise and realised things will change from time to time. I mean, we don't want to live in a society like the United States where their Constitution doesn't change, and they're dealing with a Constitution written 250 years ago that's not purpose-built for 21st century America. Like the gun laws, for example, is a classic example there. They don't do that very well. We can change, and the Constitution founders knew that, and so they wanted from time to time the Australian population to make decisions. So we need to remember this is part of what the Constitution is supposed to do. What will change for 97% of us, the non-Indigenous people, is nothing. We will still get up in the morning and go to work. We will still be able to send our kids to school. In Victoria, they've had an Indigenous voice in Victoria for several years now. It's called the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. Know it exists, but it's doing some great work advising governments. We all completely live freely in Victoria, and we don't have the sky hasn't fallen in. So for 97% of us, it won't mean anything in one sense. For Indigenous people, it'll mean a lot, because, as I said before, there's demonstrable evidence that shows policies will improve. So health, education, housing, employment outcomes will improve for Indigenous people when they're finally allowed to have a say in matters that impact upon their lives. They will give good advice to governments. The governments, if they're developing housing in remote Australia, will not just be listening to non-Indigenous bureaucrats in Canberra, they'll listen to Indigenous people in Central Australia. And beyond that, I think it does have an impact on the rest of Australia in that Aboriginal people have cared for this land for 65,000 years. They know how to deal with bushfires. They know how to deal with floods. So there's some great evidence of Aboriginal bush techniques to ensure that we don't have as many bushfires. Many fire services around Australia now using those ideas to make us deal with bushfires better. So to me, having a voice will actually benefit the whole country because we'll have to share in the wisdom of Aboriginal people. But in terms of any other impact, not at all. It's not going to cost us any more money. It's a really important question, Harpreet, because some people have said, oh, we're going to lose our land. No, that's just a scare campaign. There's nothing in the legislation or the amendment about land or taxes. Our taxes aren't going to rise. We're not going to be losing our land. That's just absolute lies. So it's not going to impact negatively on anyone.
Andrew, I have been listening that the referendum is about setting up an advisory body, right? And we want to enshrine that advisory body in the Australian Constitution. Now, what is that advisory body? Will it have any veto power or not? Our audience would be keen to understand that.
So no, it won't. How it would work is that there'll be a body set up, say around 24, 25 people. They'll be elected from Indigenous communities all across Australia. There'll be men and women on it. There'll be people from remote Australia, from cities, from rural Australia. It'll be really representative and diverse. And the government might, time to time, let's use an example, they might be developing new piece of legislation on Aboriginal education. So they'll go to the Voice and say, this is what we're thinking we do. What do you suggest? And so the body would then go back to their communities and ask the communities. And the communities would feed back through the Voice. The Voice would then give to the government, you know, some advice about what they want to do. The government will go, yeah, great idea, we'll do that. Or they might say, nah, we don't like that idea, and they won't include it. And that's all it is. It doesn't have a veto power, which means they can't compel the government. One of the things I've often said, Harpreet, is it's a voice to Parliament. It's not a voice of Parliament. Parliament still remains the supreme judgment and arbiter of what is actually put in legislation. And the Voice would just join many other groups. We have the Productivity Commission. We have the Australian Medical Association. We've got Universities Australia. We've got dozens of groups in Canberra already giving advice. And the government needs to do that. It wouldn't be a very good democracy if it didn't take advice. This would just ensure they would take advice from Aboriginal people, but they don't have to accept it. They just will get that advice with everyone else's advice. And so some people have said, oh, if it's just an advisory body, is it going to make a difference? Well, it does, because there is a form of an Indigenous voice in many other countries around the world. And again, their health, education, housing outcomes are better for their Indigenous peoples than Australia's are.
Very, very well summarized, Andrew. My other question is, are all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities supporting the Voice?
Another great question, Harpreet. You've obviously been doing a lot of this work yourself, because there's some good questions, and these are all common questions we get asked. So what's interesting to note, and I wouldn't imagine many people would know this, but there's about 830,000 Aboriginal people across the country. So if you think about the MCG on Grand Final Day, there's about 100,000 people in that. That's over 8 times the size of the MCG. That's a lot of people. That is a lot of people. That's as big as many Australian cities. Now, with that many people in the population, not everyone's going to agree. And so there are some people who don't like it. Some people think it goes too far. Some people think it doesn't go far enough. But overwhelmingly, Indigenous people support it. So between 80 and 84% of Indigenous people at multiple surveys have said they support the Voice. When they had the Uluru Dialogues, which developed the Uluru Statement 6 years ago, nearly every one of those dialogues, over 1,300 people supported the Voice. When they had consultations on what sort of models to have for the Voice, called the Co-Design Report, thousands of Indigenous people supported the Voice. So overwhelmingly, Indigenous people support the Voice. And one of the things I've been saying, Harpreet, at some of these events I've been going to, you know, if a government gets elected, whether it can be Labor or Liberal, and they get 54% of the vote, that's seen as a landslide. That the Australian electorate have overwhelmingly supported this political party because they get 54%. And that is seen as a landslide. So if a political party ever got 80%, that would just be unheard of. So Aboriginal people are 80 to 84% supporting the Voice. That is an overwhelming majority. But I think the people that don't support it, they've already got loud voices. That's the irony. They've got a lot of loud voices. And so it's very understandable for people who aren't following this closely to think, hold on a sec, there's all these people against it. Well, the reality is the vast, vast majority of Aboriginal people very much support it and are desperately working hard to try to get that achieved.
Very well answered, Andrew, and I agree with your point. Even within any community, even within a family, at times if you have to go and do some shopping, out of the 4 or 5 family members, 3 people would like to buy something, and the fourth would not agree. So I think if
Exactly, and I've said that story a few times, Harpreet. When my family decides to sit down and have some takeaway, there's 5 of us. We can't agree on what type of takeaway to get. So that's in just 5 of us. So yeah.
Now, what points are being made by those who are opposing the voice?
So they're making a few points. One of the things they're doing is lying. I'll call it out. They're just outright lies. So one of the things they're doing, as I was mentioning before when we were setting up for this event, I personally know people who have had their elderly relatives contacted by no campaigns and said if the yes vote gets up, they'll lose their backyard. That is just an absolute lie. No one's going to lose their backyard. And 30 years ago, the same scare tactics happened with native title. And to this day, no one's lost any land over native title. No one's lost a square centimetre of their backyard. So there are just complete lies. So that's one big section is just lies. The other section is they say things like, it's going to introduce race in the Constitution. You probably hear that a lot. It'll introduce race in the Constitution. It'll divide Australia. Well, the reality is race is already in the Constitution. There's already 2 racist sections that were put in the Constitution 122 years ago that were removed 50 years ago because they were so racist. But there's still what's called the race power. So it gives the federal government power to make laws for any race. Now, guess what's the one race that they've made laws for? It's not against the Scottish or the Irish or the Greeks or whoever. It's against Aboriginal people. So they've already, in the Constitution, people are divided by race. Aboriginal people are already targeted in the Constitution to have laws made about them. So this referendum is not introducing race in there. It's already in there. What it's introducing is fairness. It's introducing fairness in the Constitution to enable that to be a fairer system. Another myth is that Aboriginal affairs is costing billions and billions of dollars. I was just contacted by a journalist the other day, and I've actually just been quoted in the media about it just today, to say that no campaign's going around saying there's $37 billion being spent on Aboriginal people. That's just not true. What they simply did is got the total budget of the country, divided it by the number of Aboriginal people, and then said that's how much is being spent on Aboriginal people. But there's a huge chunk of our budget that goes on defence, and that doesn't go to you or me or anyone else. It goes on defence. So when you look at money that's specifically for Indigenous people for programs, it's an absolute fraction of that. So that's another misunderstanding. And the other sort of key one I think people are talking about is it's going to make the government do what Aboriginal people want, whereas it's clearly an advisory body. It's said that very clearly, and all the legal experts have said, yeah, this is an advisory board only.
Coming to our well-wishers, Andrew, who is supporting it?
Well, that's an interesting thing, Harpreet. One of the things, because you see Labor supporting it and many Liberals not, people sometimes think it's a Labor versus Liberal, but it's not. What's helpful to think about who supports and who doesn't. So who supports it? Well, first of all, 84% of Aboriginal people support it. Then all the Labor Party, all the Greens, all the Teal independents, many other independents, quite a lot of Liberal Party people as well. So the only Liberal Premier in Australia, the Tasmanian Premier, he supports it. The last Premier in mainland Australia from the Liberals, which was New South Wales Premier, he supports it. There's many Liberals in the National Liberal Party that have said come out to support it. So the people who are against it are the National Party, One Nation, and we all know what One Nation's like, and a few of the right wings from the Liberal Party. So it is overwhelmingly supported across the political spectrum. And then on top of that, in my experience, many multicultural members support it because people from multicultural communities, they understand discrimination, they understand racism, they understand not having a voice. So I think what I've found, and I've spoken across Australia at many events, what I've found, multicultural communities, rural communities, lots of communities that weren't sure, once they find out how simple it is, it's about recognition, listening, better results. Once they find that out, they're supporting it because they realise how simple it is, but it'll have a big difference.
And Andrew, I believe some universities and some corporates are also supporting it. A lot of sportsmen are
Yep,
also supporting it. Sportswomen are also supporting it.
yep.
Can you name
Thanks
a
for
few names?
absolutely. So the university you and I both work at, Federation University, is strongly supporting it. We've come out and we've got a big resource page on it. We're very strongly supporting it. I think the vast majority of universities support it. The vast majority of corporates support it. So organisations that are conservative and they know how to make money, like mining companies, the banks, they're not going to just do something wishy-washy. They would have researched this very thoroughly and they know how safe it is. They're all supporting it as well. So lots of prominent sports people are supporting it. So I don't know very many prominent community members who are against it, except that the two key ones, which probably some people would have heard of, are Warren Mundine and Jacinta Price. But they represent a tiny fraction of the Aboriginal population. And it's interesting that Jacinta Price is probably the most effective no campaigner. She comes from Central Australia and she's an Aboriginal woman from Central Australia. And, you know, she's got a right to her own views. That's fine. But it's important to note she's not representing her community. Every major Aboriginal organisation in Central Australia, including the land councils, the health councils, the legal councils, they all, to every organisation, support the voice. So they all very much strongly support the voice.
We are getting some very interesting messages that I would quickly read. There's a message from Susan Anderson, a very good message, which says, I think it is time to allow Aboriginal people to speak about themselves for the first time since colonization. Now, very good point, Sue. And I believe, you know, some of us who have lived in India and other parts of the world, we have been colonized. How do you think, you know, this referendum relates to the colonization that, you know, the Aboriginals have gone through and that we have gone through? Any thoughts on that, Andrew?
Absolutely, and that's why I think so many multicultural communities are supporting the voice, because they understand what discrimination is about. And so it's a really good point, because if you go back a little bit in history, it's only been the last 6 years since the Uluru Statement's come out the saying about the voice. But then further back, there's been discussions amongst Indigenous leaders for many years. Further back to that, we had the referendum in 1999 where there was a call to have Indigenous people recognised in the Constitution, and that was rejected. Further back to that, decades and decades, Aboriginal people have been calling for a voice. So this isn't something, I think many people have not followed this, and they heard Anthony Albanese say on the election night last year about a voice to Parliament. They thought, what's happening? So that's another myth that comes up, that this is Albanese or the Labor Party's idea. It's not. Aboriginal people have been calling for a voice to help govern their affairs and help give advice in their affairs since the 1930s. So well over 90 odd years, Aboriginal people have been calling for this, and it's been rejected so many times. Let's try something new. It's really important to note that I don't know if people have heard called closing the gap target. So that looks at health and education issues, and Aboriginal people are behind the rest of Australia in multiple socioeconomic indicators like health, education, housing. And there's 13 gaps that the government's trying to close. And this is bipartisan. The Liberals support closing these gaps as well. But of those 13 targets, only 4 are on track. The other 9 are either getting worse or not getting better. So the status quo has failed. There's no doubt the last 50 years of federal government involvement in Aboriginal affairs has not brought proper results. So this is what the referendum is going to do. But it's important to note the referendum will not just address those issues, as important as they are. It will make the country better as a whole, because it will give the capacity for Indigenous knowledges to be brought forward on issues such as health and education. That'll be better for the country.
Another interesting question that has come from Pradeep, who is writing this for his friend. Pradeep says that some people are worried if racial preference should be put in constitution. Is it beginning of an apartheid in Australia?
Absolutely not. And that's what I was saying before. The race is already in the Constitution. The government has a power to make laws for a race of people, which has only ever been applied to Aboriginal people. But there is race in the Constitution. All this is saying is Aboriginal people who've lived on this land for 65,000 years and have lived very successfully, had very successful lifestyles in this country for thousands of years, have a right to be heard. What the real question in this referendum is, do you think Aboriginal people should be allowed to talk? That's ultimately what it is. If you're saying no, if you're voting no, you're really saying you don't think Aboriginal people should speak. And that's shocking. Aboriginal people should be allowed to have a voice. And why it should be in the Constitution? So this is the other key thing. People, even many people in the no case actually think a voice would be great, and they're happy to do it. They don't want it in the Constitution. But that shows an ignorance of our history. So remember when I said in 1967, the federal government got the powers to make laws for Aboriginal people for the first time. And in the 56 years since, there's been a succession of advisory bodies created by governments. And this is for Indigenous advisory bodies, often being elected. And each and every one of those bodies has been abolished by either Labor or Liberal when they've come to power, because they're both governments, both Labor and Liberal, as the two parties that have ruled Australia. Both parties have seen Aboriginal affairs as a political football. And what I mean by that is they want to look at a way to get one up. Like, say, if Labor brought in a policy on Indigenous body, when the Liberals got back in, they could abolish it, or vice versa, because it makes the other party look bad. So they treat Aboriginal people as a way to get one over the other group. And if people don't believe that happens, just look at the referendum. That there was many people in the Liberal Party who wanted to support the voice, but in the end, the party itself has gone against the voice, and it's well understood. It's really to try to give Anthony Albanese a bloody nose, to try to bring him down to the polls. So they're using Aboriginal affairs as a political football, as a way to get over the Labor Party. So that's a great example why, for a small population of only 3% of the whole population, Indigenous people are not a big population of the rest of Australia, to ensure that Aboriginal people get a genuine say in matters that impact their lives, to get a consistent say, to get a stable say, and not one that gets getting created and abolished through legislation. It needs to be protected in the Constitution.
Andrew, you have done a lot of research. What does the experience from other countries like New Zealand, Canada guide us on this front? Are we trying the right thing? Do we have more confidence from? Yeah.
So New Zealand, Canada, the United States, which are three countries very similar to Australia, all multicultural countries, all countries that were colonised by the British, all countries that have Indigenous peoples, very similar. All Western countries. All of those countries have long recognised Indigenous peoples in their constitution. All countries have long acknowledged an Indigenous voice to their parliament in one form or another. And all four of those countries, all three of those countries, are miles ahead of Australia in outcomes for Indigenous peoples. On top of that, you've got Sami parliaments in Northern Europe. So those Scandinavian countries actually have models quite similar to what the Voice to Parliament would be. Voice to Parliament, which would just be advisory bodies to the governments of Norway and Sweden. And those countries have, again, got really good results for Indigenous peoples. So I think that's really important. I think I did see, I'm not very good at reading the text that's coming through as well. I think I saw something about why give this a try. Well, we should give it a try because it's been proven to work in other countries, and a version of the voice is proven to work in organisations. So I've been an academic for 25, 30 years, and my research has been with Indigenous peoples on things like stolen wages, reconciliation, health, education policies. And all my knowledge over many decades shows that when I've researched with Indigenous peoples have been my partners, and we have genuine collaborative relationships, the research comes out pretty well. And that's clearly demonstrated. So why we want to give it a try, it's never been tried in Australia at a national level before, but it's been tried in many other countries and has been tried in small areas and has had brilliant results. So this undoubtedly will work. It's not going to be instantaneous. What would happen if the referendum is successful is that then the government would go away and consult with Indigenous people and other people about how the exact form of the voice would operate. And then that would be the model, and then that would start giving advice. But I have absolutely no doubt within a few years, you'll start to see really good results.
Andrew, I promise everyone that we'll finish by 7:30, but we'll take one more question,
Sure.
which I will just club. One of the questions is, people are of the view that yes would mean more taxes in future. Any clarification on that? And again, a related question is, what will it cost to run the advisory committee, and how will the right people be selected? Very pertinent questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. So the first question is, there's no doubt that if the voice was created, there would be less money spent on Indigenous affairs. So, for example, you might have some non-Indigenous bureaucrats in Canberra, and they have to develop a housing policy of Central Australia. And they go, oh, yeah, we'll just create some houses like they are in Canberra. And this has actually been done. They create the house in Canberra, but those houses are for a small Western nuclear family, not for a large extended family that live in Central Australia. And so those houses are not built for purpose. They're also built in totally different climates. So those houses get demolished and people build their own structures with parts of those housing, therefore creating an enormous waste of money. Wouldn't it be better to have the voice say, this is the designs the community would like, than the money spent on houses already? And so that's just a clear example that if the voice was implemented, there will be far more effective outcomes, not just for Indigenous people's lives, which is so important, but also for the finance of the country. So undoubtedly it would save a huge amount of money, because you wouldn't have that waste that happens right now with poor advice coming out of Canberra.
And do you think there will be some new taxes for us because of all this?
No, sorry, that's the other part of the question. No, absolutely not. There's going to be no taxes whatsoever. As I said, they will save money by doing this model. There'll be no new taxes. It won't cost a lot. There'll be people that will be representing the community, just like many other advisory bodies, and they will give effective advice that will transform this country, not just for Indigenous peoples, but overall.
And as Sue says, the committee will be elected by the Aboriginal people themselves.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that has been said is, why don't we get all this detail? And that's another myth that is important to note. So I urge people to have a look at the Constitution. The Constitution is a really very thin document that basically provides a framework. It doesn't provide details. So, for example, it has a short paragraph that Australia will have a social security system. It doesn't say where the social security offices are across Australia. It doesn't say what the unemployment benefit is. Those details are left up to Parliament, which makes sense, because the social security system that the Constitution's founders wanted to put in 1901 is not going to be what we need in 2023. So the idea is we vote on the idea of a voice. That's the framework that goes in the Constitution. But then the Parliament has to say how it will be created. So that's why there's no detail there, because the detail has to be worked out by the Parliament, which is what most people want, because the Parliament is the ultimate authority. But there's been some guidelines. So if it was successful under the Albanese government, they've already committed to having about 25 people, male and female equal representatives. There's going to be representatives from across Australia, and it will be elected, as Sue said. Yeah.
Great. I think, Andrew, very, very good answers. It really clarifies a lot of things, provides all the participants a lot of new information, which they can take back to their community. For those who joined today, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to Andrew as well. And again, I just want to reiterate the fact that this is a series of online discussions that we are having. We have one discussion today. Tomorrow, we will have Pamela Anderson, who will be coming and attending the session. Andrew, you are welcome to join tomorrow if you want to. And again, Wednesday, Andrew is back again. If you have more questions, we can ask Andrew questions again. But again, all of these things are focused and aimed at getting the right information and sharing it with our community members, our friends, relatives, so that, you know, we engage ourselves in the democratic processes of Australia, rather than just voting for the sake of voting and not getting an infringement notice.
Thank you very much. And can I just add, it's great that everyone's here online educating yourselves. Fantastic. Learn more, go to reputable websites, and then talk to your family, friends, and communities. You've really got to talk to people, because the amount of people who come up to me when they've learned about this and say, we're now going to vote yes, because they've learned about it, that's what we want to see replicated. So we can still win this if we get more everyday people just having discussions with their friends, families, and communities. But thanks so much, Harpreet, for your support and for this initiative. It's fantastic.
And thank you, Andrew. Thank you, all the participants, and special thanks to my team of Pradeep, Karandeep, and Randeep, who have been, working to make this session happen and have done this session in a very nice way. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow. And please spread the word for those who are keen to learn and come tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.